Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of our podcast, the Passwordless Journey. First off, let me welcome my co host, Ashwin Rana. Ashwin, how are you?
I'm doing good. Hello, Ashish. It's great to be joining you.
Ashwin, I am assuming that you have been basking in the glory of the success of our first episode, which actually received quite a tremendous response from the people.
That's correct. Yeah, we saw lots of good feedback, maybe even requests for additional episodes.
Ashwin, let me just put it this way. uh, you know, we had the same viewership of any episode on PBS, and more people liked our podcast than the last season of Game of Thrones. So that tells you something, which is
Oh,
more than
wow,
one.
that's
Which is more than
impressive.
one. Anyway, so I trust you're doing well, and speaking of trust, and within the context of our episode today, lack thereof, we want to touch on a topic that we've been hearing a lot of, especially in the wake of the recent events with the war in Ukraine, and all that has been going on in the world with cyber attacks. Um, a term that is definitely spamming my LinkedIn feeds, and I want to know more about, which is zero trust. So I want to get right into this serious discussion about, first off, what is zero trust? I mean, who even coined this term? We have to give it to the cybersecurity industry. We come up with excellent solutions, but we are definitely not good with coining these terms, because I'll tell you, zero trust is something I've used in my household with my two boys for many, many years. For example, I'll tell my boys to do something and I have zero trust that they'll do it. So they follow my instructions. So why don't you go ahead and kick us off and take us in the right direction, so everybody, so we can level set this with everybody who's watching this. What is zero trust and who has come up with this term?
Most definitely. So, the term zero trust was coined by Forrester research analyst and thought leader John Kindervard, and it follows the principle that never trust but always verify. Now, I have to tell you in the same breath that Gartner has also come up with similar zero trust security framework. It's titled CARTA and stands for Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment. It's quite mouthful, but hopefully as we go through, we will simplify things. And the whole concept of zero trust in cybersecurity has been, at least it's evolving. Many modern enterprises and government security architecture were already discussing that, but the term itself, as we talked about, was coined by the Forrester research analyst.
We talked about zero trust, and already we are looking at another acronym, CARTA. So this is exactly why I wanted to do this podcast, so that we can kind of flush through these acronyms and have our viewers understand, what is the difference and what exactly these things mean. So speaking of zero trust, Ashwin, what are some of the basic tenets or basic principles of zero trust, like that you will, if you want to kind of list them out, how would you kind of you know list these principles in?
It's a very good point. But before I go there, I thought it'd be good to, just brief revisit of where we come from.
Hmm.
So, as you probably are fully aware that in last decade or so, applications have started moving out of the enterprise data center to cloud. We have seen more and more companies offering and consuming SaaS services. Office 365, of course, is a big one. Google Suite, Salesforce, Box, Dropbox, just name it, right? And I would say in the yesteryears or in the olden days, employees used to always go to office. However, now situation has changed. First of all, enterprise has many office locations,
Hmm.
and employees are working from wherever they please, whether it's a home,
Remote.
office,
Yeah.
airport, hotel, Starbucks, just name it. And even the employees who go to office every day, the work doesn't end when they go home. They are still working. So in that sense, uh, the fact that there is a trusted network, and that's an enterprise network, it's becoming less and less relevant because employees are working from everywhere.
Yeah.
Also, they are working from many devices, not just one company's device. Average employee uses probably 3 to 4 devices. They have maybe their office
Yes.
laptop, their home laptop, their iPad, their Android or iOS phone. So enterprises have to make sure that they provide security for all this gamut of devices, which they may or may not manage or control. So as a result of that, old perimeter-based security really doesn't work.
Understand.
So in this new world, you have to provide a solution which doesn't rely on trustworthiness of the corporate network. You should not, assume that the corporate network is any more secure than any public network or Starbucks network. And the basic tenet or principle of zero trust is that you should do continuous authentication, authorization, and check this security posture for the device and the identity for each request. That's the basic principle.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right on the mark, because post-COVID, things have completely changed. Pre-COVID, there was still this hesitation about BYOD, letting employees work on, across their devices and, from different locations and things like that. But now this is just a norm. Enterprises have to adopt to this new norm, if you will. But speaking of, zero trust, Ashwin, a little bit more, right? I wanted to kind of get to the bottom. Is this like a product or a service that I can purchase? I mean, can I go to Costco and buy a zero trust based soap? What exactly is, how is this kind of, positioned basically?
That's a very good point. So, there is no product or service you could buy and call it, your enterprise is zero trust compliant as such. It is more of a framework or cybersecurity principles, which you have to, build your enterprise architecture based on those. And as a result of that, you may have to, purchase services or product from many different companies, keeping in mind that the zero trust architecture and make sure that they are compliant. Maybe we can touch on some of that in today's discussion, but that's the whole idea.
So is this like a framework, or is it an architecture? Is it a protocol? Is it an interface, standard interface? Some standards have been written based on this zero trust.
It's a very good point. So no, it's really not a protocol. However, it is framework, as you mentioned, and there are NIST standard for zero trust architecture. As such, NIST 800-207 is one of the more comprehensive and vendor neutral architecture, which many companies probably could rely on. And due to the recent geopolitical event you mentioned earlier, there is more and more emphasis on zero trust as such. In January of 2022, there's a new directive by the White House Office of OMB office, I would say, and they have analyzed this area in much more detail.
Okay, so let's delve a little bit now into the details of the zero trust architecture. So you were mentioning something about a recommendation that came in from the US government, specifically for federal agencies as well as for enterprises to adopt the zero trust architecture. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on what those recommendations are and what exactly the enterprises should be looking for?
So first of all, there is a greater emphasis on strong enterprise security, identity and access management, and the use of MFA. There is also recognition that incremental approach would not work. The enterprises would have to take bold and transformative approach to achieving that zero trust architecture, if you will. there is a stronger emphasis and focus on securing the enterprises against targeted or sophisticated phishing attacks. So not just generic attacks, but now they are even becoming a lot more specific in saying that enterprises should put a solution in place which can withstand those phishing attacks as well.
Mhm. So, so what are these, what are some of the foundations, if you will, or zero trust pillars, if you will, focused around?
So CISA, has organized the whole zero trust framework across 5 trust pillars.
Mhm.
So identity, of course, is at the center of it. Devices are one of the other pillar. Networks is third pillar. I would say applications and workloads as well as data are some of the additional pillars. So there are 5 pillars. All of them have visibility and analytics weaved into each of those pillars because that touches each of those areas.
Okay, I guess each of this can become its own separate podcast, because when you mention networks, we keep hearing about zero trust network access, ZTNA, and things like that, and there is new terms around SASE and CASB and all of these things. But I feel that identity, Ashwin, should be at the top to be discussed, right? And I want to kind of focus a little bit there. The reason being, most breaches in the enterprise can be attributed to loss of credentials, right? So, what are some of the actions or some of the things that the enterprise can implement to improve on the identity side?
So some of the recommendation we see being mentioned as part of the zero trust architecture is the recommendation is to have enterprise deploy enterprise-wide identity systems. And in 2022, of course, it seems pretty like common sense recommendation, but the enterprises did not grow that way. They had disparate directories where each application may have its own directory and it's not tied to the central directory. So the idea is that you have a central directory and each of the application get their provisioning data from that central directory. So you do not have to manage and maintain those directories separately. Also have SSO solution, and those applications rely on those SSO solutions to authenticate the user rather than having a separate authentication solution for each of the application. You could use modern protocol like OpenID Connect or SAML rather than some of the older protocol to authenticate that. As well as for provisioning, you can use a protocol like SCIM or System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. And now you can provision each of those applications. So that's one recommendation.
So SCIM is something like a standard defined for synchronizing identities across directories as well as across applications, right? That's what. So application don't have to maintain the database, but the SSO maintains that database of identities and within a directory, and then you can kind of synchronize if you're using a third-party IDP and things like that, right?
That's correct. And some of the benefit you get as a result of that is you are quickly able to reflect the changes across all applications.
Understand. So one of the other things, Ashwin, that is being talked about quite a bit is multi-factor authentication. We are seeing this in our personal lives also, right? If you go to Google and access your email, for instance, now they are recommending you use two-factor authentication. Let's talk a little bit about MFA and some of the things, something that came in and it became very clear, especially recently, is that most legacy MFA, if you will, is also phishable. So let's talk a little bit about this strong, use a strong MFA. What does a strong MFA look like? What does a strong multi-factor authentication solution for an enterprise look like?
So I guess early on the recommendation was just to use any MFA, but
Yeah.
because now the attacks have become more advanced, there are targeted attacks, there are sophisticated attacks, where you may get an email
Mhm.
um, from a seems like a trusted source, and it may be even referring to some of the things you may have posted on LinkedIn or Facebook. So seems like, everything is checking out, and they're telling you to, click on a specific link, for example, to maybe accept a connect request. So it may be looking like, okay, the request is coming from LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
So those are the phishing link. Now, once you click on those, the older MFA, whether using a phone call itself to receive the one-time code, or SMS, or in general, app delivered TOTP or OTP,
Mhm.
I would say that even some of the older U2F, FIDO U2F compliant MFAs out there are also not able to provide protection against the phishing attacks. So you truly want to make sure that the MFA solution you select is phishing resistant. So even if you fall for those email, which is coming to you from a hacker,
Mhm.
it should still protect you against that.
Okay. So phishing links, when you were talking about, these links are legitimate, right? I mean, they do present, uh, a certificate that is issued and is recognized by a browser. So it's not like the browser can recognize and say, hey, this looks like a phishing link or something like that, right? It
That's
would look
correct.
similar, yeah.
Again, using the example of LinkedIn, right? The whole email would look completely legit, but
Mhm.
rather than it's coming from LinkedIn, it may be coming from link.com. And in Rush, we don't look at that.
Right.
Of course, the hacker or attacker has obtained uh, a legitimate certificate for that site. So your browser would not complain. You will still see that green lock sign, which seem to indicate that you are, communicating securely. However, that site is acting as a man in the middle, and they are collecting as you log in with passwords. They are collecting your username, your password, and because they are in the path for all the traffic, they could even see your SMS or TOTP. Even if you were using push notification and they did not go through that site, they're still able to get the access token or cookies after the successful authentication. From that point onwards, they can log in as you from any site, and now they have access to everything what you would have.
I think that's a big one, right? I mean, I think the view overall was that if we do multi-factor, we've kind of prevented these type of attacks, but it seems like hackers have even found ways to around it, especially if it's all inbound, right? They are able to get your username, password, and they also proxy this request over to the legitimate site, so you feel like you're actually interacting with a legitimate site. And all the while they are able to hack your password, including your one-time code as well. So
That's
it's
correct.
valid for
And
some time. Yeah.
yeah, that is the reason why the recommendation is to go passwordless and use phishing resistant MFA, so that even if you fall for those links, which, it's not a question of if, it's just when, right? We all, someday you are in hurry, you are trying to just go about doing a business, multitasking, and you may end up clicking on a link. But it's as a result of that, nothing of value should be compromised, and the solution should protect you.
Understand. So we talked about the enterprises deploying an SSO solution to access application. We talked about multi-factor authentication, strong multi-factor authentication that doesn't rely on centralized credentials or secondary devices receiving a form of one-time password or code. Let's talk authorization, because we have to bring up authorization. And again, the recommendation from the US government, also based on what you mentioned about the zero trust framework, there's a new way to authorize based on device's security posture. I should just elaborate a little bit on this. What is this security posture? What are these signals that we can get from the device?
Most definitely. So the recommendation is to get at least one device level signal. Of course, we would recommend to get a lot more than one, but at least that's the minimum requirement. Also, the recommendation is to do continuous evaluation of access requests. So not just one time, but continuously check if the device is still compliant, is the identity still compliant. And then in terms of the device security itself, that's like a, one major area by itself. Of course, the recommendation would be that whatever solution you select should give you the inventory of the assets, the devices you have. You should be running a strong EDR solution like CrowdStrike on your devices. And then in terms of collecting the device security posture, you want to, if this is a managed device, of course, the solution you select should support managed and unmanaged device. But if it's supposed to be managed device, then, make sure that you are able to have programmatic way using APIs, check with the MDM vendor. And in this case, it could be Microsoft Intune or VMware AirWatch or Jamf for others. You also want to see if, the presence of EDR is there or not. And if the EDR vendor supports API-based integration, then you want to make sure that you are able to check that, yes, that enterprises policies are being enforced. And if they have the concept of zero trust score, then you could collect that as well. And before you authorize that device or user to proceed further, maybe check against those zero trust score. You want to look for if the local firewall is enabled or not, whether the hard disk is encrypted or not, whether the antivirus software is running or not. There are many things you could check for. You could also look for, request and put that in the context of time of the day, right? Because if Ashish Bhatia normally accesses Salesforce during 8 to 5, and all of a sudden 2 in the morning, if he's accessing this request, is this something anomalous behavior or this is normal behavior for this user? And maybe either deny or log the event or ask for maybe additional factors when you see something which is not normal for that user. So there is, this concept of AI ML, if you will, where you are looking at the past patterns and then based on that deciding, whether this is normal for this user or not, or for this organization or not.
It makes sense, Ashwin. Especially, you talked about MDM and EDR. I think we should mention some of the other vendors in the space, right? I mean, that we have at least, we've spoken to so many enterprises. They use either like an Intune if you're a Microsoft shop, or Jamf if you're mostly Mac, right? There's also companies like Kanji now that are coming, that we are coming across on the MDM space. VMware, right? Workspace, is that the
Workspace one.
Workspace one? And then EDR, that's the endpoint security software, right? Like CrowdStrike, and then you have Tenable, there is Carbon Black. Enterprises, for the most part, have deployed these for their users. And again, we're talking about, enabling BYOD and doing it safely under the safe guidance of the enterprise. There's always this concern about, I'm allowing these devices to come into my and access critical resources, whether it's in the SaaS or whether, in the cloud, or whether it's in the private cloud behind an SSO, an internal application. So they want to make sure that these things are compliant to the policy, right? That's the whole idea.
That is the whole idea. That's
so. I think at this point, I think we have a good understanding from an from an identity standpoint, right? So, would it be safe to say that zero trust is not truly a destination, but it's a journey? Like same thing, like the way, that's exactly why we've named our podcast, right? The passwordless journey, because it's not a destination. You have to slowly get there, right? What would be your thoughts on that?
You are 100% right. It's definitely not a destination, it's a journey. And each enterprise will have to evaluate their own environment, their use cases. and start introducing some of these principles we talked about as part of their own zero trust architecture, if you will. Um, but from the identity and access management perspective, there are a few key things we talked about, and those should be definitely in enterprises' mind while they are evaluating the zero trust architecture.
And from that standpoint, if I have to summarize this for our listeners, for someone who doesn't want to listen to 20 minutes worth of conversation, just come here. From an identity standpoint, the main pillar of zero trust, if I have to summarize this, zero trust framework recommends that you use cryptographic key-based authentication schemes, similar to certificate-based authentication, except that you don't use centralized private keys. You generate those keys right on the device and you store them in locations like TPM or TEE, which is a trusted execution environment, so that they are stored locally within the device in an area which is insulated from the rest of the network. They never leave the device. You use unphishable MFA. We spent some good amount of time talking about how the MFA solution should be stronger and that legacy MFA is phishable. We talked about we talked about security posture based authentication and authorization. So this is where we collect all the risk signals from the device, things like whether the device is managed, unmanaged, whether it's running an EDR software, whether it is, whether the firewall is turned on, hard drive is encrypted, so many signals that you want to be able to collect. And then finally, to be able to do this on a continuous basis, right? The continuous access evaluation is what we need to be doing, right? To summarize all of this.
That's a really good summary. But if I was your listener, then I would like to see if a solution like that exists today or not. So any thoughts?
I think it does, and I think both of us can. One of that I can actually see in your background. So why don't we talk about identity and access management players, right? That are actually achieving this, in this space.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So yeah, beyond identity, our employer, of course, we believe that all the points we discussed, we could meet all of those requirements today. Unfishable MFA specifically is, becoming a lot more mainstream. We are able to support that as well as all the other requirement. Of course, there are other solutions out there with various degree of maturity and ease of use. So I would say that our listeners are smart. They'll probably figure it out. But all I can say is, yes, check out beyondidentity.com.
Yeah, definitely. Look at that, promoting on my podcast. All right, Ashwin, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Always fun talking to you about this type of complicated subject and how you are able to simplify this for our listeners. So stay tuned. We're going to come back with some more fun topics, and hopefully make it simple for you. So stay tuned. Until next time, thank you for watching.
Thank you.